Philosophers talk to our times, technology and us. For the very first time in all of human history, mankind is learning something. He's learning to be a living member of a living species. He's freeing himself from that great politics of death that has animated his existence for so very long and was so adept at arranging occasional grisly executions. He is enmeshing himself in a new kind of politics, a new kind of thought that will entrap him from cradle unto grave. That's a paraphrase, very paraphrase, of the conclusion of History of Sexuality, Volume 1, I think, roughly, by Foucault. And for me, it sums up in a nutshell the thinker I want to do today, Freud. I think the very first book I ever read as 17, a very academic book, was a book called Freudian Fallacy by somebody Thornton, which is a systematic deconstruction, demolition really, of Freud and Freudian thought from the position of a medical historian, looking at where Freud had fitted in within the history of medicine, how retro the ideas were, how they were a return to that era of romantic medicine that had typified the generation before Freud. So that far from being groundbreaking, they were actually much more a return to the kind of medicine practiced in Hegel, when evil spirits and reason were seen to dominate over drugs and actual comprehension. Thornton is very clear on the sheer medical revolution that had happened for the two generations preceding Freud. This was the time when the old humoral theory had been overthrown, totally destroyed. New hospitals, new practices, new beliefs about hygiene had suddenly come to the fore. And with it, new drugs and new possibilities. More than that, the microbe had been discovered, had been located, I think it's in 1870 something or other, 79 maybe, as the major drive of disease. And they were beginning to be able to think about how you would get rid of microbes through chemicals. Scabies was known to be caused by a beetle and not merely by the humours moving. All of that she contrasts then with psychoanalysis and its fundamental retro idea of something, if not called humours rebranded for another age. More than that, fascinatingly, Thornton talks about Freud's use of cocaine, which was very, very strong in the 1890s when he's writing his theory, and it's his belief in something called the nasal reflex neurosis, which he points out was both caused and treated with cocaine. Freud's first paper, in case you don't know, was actually on cocaine, Über Cocaine. And it's a book of strange religious devotion that actually misses the sole use for cocaine, which was as a local anaesthetic. It allowed the cataract operation to continue. And Freud actually misses it, and later on confesses it was his laziness. He doesn't do it in his autobiography, but he does it in a letter that actually made him miss the sole medical use of the cocaine he was giving all his patients and taking himself. Becoming, in his hagiographer Jones's words, a social menace. And she compares very clearly Freud's writings to cocaine usage and the writings of any other cocaine use. Basically to bad effect. It's a demolition job. So why have I brought that up? I've brought it up because for me there is a mystery to Freud, a genuine mystery. When I was at one of my dark patches, I mean a dark patch of the soul, we all have them from time to time, I wouldn't say I read the complete works of Freud, he wrote a huge of a lot, but I read an entire university library worth of them, from beginning to end. And to say that I was underwhelmed would itself be a little bit of an understatement. I couldn't see the point of them. They did indeed seem hopelessly retro. Oh, well written. Freud is a great writer, and he absolutely is. I mean, he really is. He writes very clearly, but very symbolically. His arguments aren't real arguments. They're kind of They're not even myths, because myths are more complex than that. They're simplicities, where deep emotions are symbolically described, and that symbolism is then put into some kind of faux dynamism based on the steam engine, as far as I could work out. Or so that the human mind seems halfway between a pressure cooker and a yogurt, somewhere in between, bubbling up, don't you know? And he's very proud of notions like the unconscious that are absolutely explicit in Spinoza or Leibniz or Hume. I mean, they've been around for donkey's years, but Freud is forever trumpeting them and saying he's the person who's discovered them for medicine, except they'd been there for years. Janet was talking about it. Janet, who I've also read, has a totally different account of time, and one that I find far more convincing, if I'm honest with you. And so that always led to me the mystery, what it was in Freud, apart from the fact that it's actually accessible writing, Janet doesn't write so well, that made it so dominant a force for understanding the human mind for so very long. Even now, it infuses the way we understand what we are. And that goes back partly to the Foucault, but also partly to another thing that was happening in the world of Freud, which is all about technology. That humans were changing. The Industrial Revolution had put people in cities, had caught them up in endless diseases such as cholera, had caught them up more so in a world of drugs. The world of Freud, the 1890s, the initial pain of the Industrial Revolution is just beginning to be mitigated. You're beginning to get sewage systems. You're beginning to get adequate treatment of water, at least in London. You're beginning to get an idea that the poor needs to be dealt with not just by the workhouse. It's slow, but it is happening. But something else is happening. On the back of empire, there's a great level of prosperity. And what humans are and what they're doing is hugely on the shift. I don't think it is possible to exaggerate the invention of something like gas in people's houses. I mean, for two reasons. First of all, it actually did genuinely give women the vapours because it took away carbon dioxide and broadcast carbon monoxide. So it created hysteria, which was, of course, a lot of Freud's early clientele. So the very chemical environment in which folk lived created extra symptoms that appeared mental for Freud to treat. But also, it opened up the world in a totally different way. In The Diary of a Nobody, Mr. Charles Pooter stays awake often till 12 o'clock at night. And the entire point of the book is that he's not a rake, he's just Mr. Normal. So an entire world was opening up, a world of the evening, a world where you could socialise late at night, you could have friends round, and you could drink Drax and Freya's champagne. A world then where not only were people impressed one with the other and caught up in a stink, not just of human excrement, but also an animal excrement, but also of chemicals, of drugs, of the gas that they were burning, but also the arsenic they were putting in their wallpaper so that it was deadly. Caught up then in the smell of the factories and the endless coal dust, in a chemical soup, the like of which I don't think humans had ever lived with before. And even today, we would not match. It was an amazing technological time then, when what it was to be a human was caught up, both in this chemical fog, but also in a mental fog. Charles Pooter gets up and has to get to work by about 8 o'clock in the morning. He's staying up till 12. It's kind of the first time in human history then, when people are suffering from major sleep deprivation, but still working. When London is full of fogs, not just caused by coal dust, but caused by insomnia, by not going to bed early enough. It is a world then absolutely on the move, full of strange dreams, fueled by cocaine or carbon monoxide or just sleeplessness. In such a world, humans needed a new myth to understand who and what they were. How else could they do it? Because what they were had shifted. That old kind of deep belief rooted in the countryside and a god and a human soul and nature, had been replaced by this chemical fog. A fog of people, of quiet sleeplessness, of days going into nights, going into days, where the common people have were living like the aristocrats of 40 or 50 years prior. In such a world, Freud, for me, I think, represents the perfect mythology. He allows you to understand what that fog is. Understand, locate yourself within it. Think of it in terms of not a chemical drizzle and a perpetual slight insomnia, but rather in terms of an unconscious, something we're all caught up with, all sharing, all together. He's providing then, if you like, a mythology, a real mythology. For a scientific age, one not based on gods, one that reconciles humans to being animal and explains how they are still animal, but also understands and articulates how they are caught up within this strange new world, where the actions are no longer purely human, but have become also chemical, and also those silent microbes that invade the soul. Freud was part of the strategy by which humans learnt to live together, live through each other in great cities, living lives across, being able to live a life that was more than just work, as a burgeoning middle classes. Lived in worlds that were eminently confusing, that were not like their forefathers, and needed a way to navigate their new feelings and their new feelings about their children. It is a way then to understand and to explain the world of Charles Pooter. Oh, not to Charles Pooter, who would no doubt have thought Freudianism was dangerously radical, but at least to Lupin, his son, at least to those who lived as the second generation of that new world. And as such, as a mythology that allows them to understand how their feelings are deep and yet somehow out of place in the world of societies in which they exist, in the brittle gaslight, but also how all the other feelings, all the ones that I would probably think was inspired by endless chemical trips, fitted in. It provides a framework, a way to understand how you live in this new age that is capable of keeping you alive or murdering you in the First World War. To say Freud was lucky is wrong. He wasn't lucky or unlucky. He just was a thing. He was the priest of a new age. He allowed people to fix their mind, to screw them down in a time when it's become hard to screw a mind down. No wonder he was so influential. It didn't matter that his theories didn't make much sense. That was not the point. The point was that they were there, and that by taking them up and thinking about them, people could understand, in a sort of a way, the new world they'd entered and the new things they would have to be within it.